Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I want to talk about gay men and how to avoid the pitfalls of dating. In my long 30 years in 2022 practice in psychotherapy as a specialist in gay male individuals and couples and even polyamorous relationships, I see trends that pop up every few months or so. And these past couple of weeks have been marked by a trend about single gay men and their trials and tribulations in dating, especially since nationally and globally, the pandemic restrictions of the past 2 years have largely been lifted. Guys are getting out there, dating again, and with all the pros and cons that come with it. The pros are obvious. I mean, you're having fun, you're creating a sense of community and fraternity with your gay male peers. You're possibly meeting someone who could become a serious long-term relationship partner or spouse. You're getting out of the house after now literally years of safer at home messages. You're enjoying restaurants, concerts, theater, movies, hikes, shopping, sporting events, festivals, and gay community events. But I also hear about the downsides. The pitfalls of dating that often, but not always, signal the end of dating that particular person. So here, today, I'd like to share a list of some of the most common dating pitfalls that I hear about, that I help guys overcome in dating, and offer some advice and guidance on how to adaptively cope, one of my favorite phrases, for dealing with life with them. And remember, like in all podcast episodes, this can't be seen as official advice because of the legality and the ethics of that. So I'm speaking more in an educational sense and not in a clinical sense, unless you're actually my psychotherapy client. So that's an important little legal caveat, right? We have to say these things. And it's for your protection and mine. So for educational purposes only, as we say about blogs and podcasts. So, in no particular order, let's look at the list. So, number one, I think, is prejudice. Whether it's racism, ageism, internalized homophobia, HIV phobia, ableism, sexism, xenophobia, the fear of foreigners, anti-Semitism, or something else. Being on a date with a guy who demonstrates one of these fear and hate-based traits is demoralizing and off-putting and disappointing because it usually means the end of dating that person, or probably should. Gay men, despite being minorities themselves, are not immune from indulging in bigotries against other minorities. When you're on a date and a guy makes an offensive remark about a nearby patron at a restaurant or the server staff or whoever, he's showing you during the initial basic information collection phase of dating that he's probably got some obnoxious prejudices if he's that offensive on a first date, and supposedly on his best and most charming behavior to impress. It's kind of odd to think of social justice in dating, but that's actually a thing. Hold yourself and the guys you date to standards of fairness and equality. Life being partnered or married to some kind of bigot is its own kind of misery. And I hear about that sometimes in the long term. So what's the coping for this? So for each one of these pitfalls, I'm going to give you a bit of a coping strategy. So tell your date when he says something offensive. Say something like, if he refers to a nearby person with a slur, say, I wouldn't use that word, but you're right, she shouldn't have cut you off in traffic like that. Or, I'm not whatever myself, but I have friends who are, and they are nothing like you seem to think. I'm offended that you use that word. Fill in the blank with whatever slur they happen to be indulging in. Number two is handling sexual expression. So, on a previous episode, I talked about the 6 principles of sexual health as applied to gay men. Now, with credit to Michael Vigorito and Doug Braun-Harvey, who wrote the book Treating Out of Control Sexual Behavior, they discussed the 6 principles of sexual health, and I took it a little step further to apply more specifically to gay men. But in that episode, I reviewed how sexual expression has certain commonly accepted ethical principles that transcend religion, cultures, social context, a very global approach. But dating a guy can reveal how he handles sexual expression, from the ethical, fun, compassionate, and just hot, to being an obnoxious, almost predator. If a guy comes on too strong, learn to set boundaries about when to and not to agree to sexual play with him, in whatever limits work for you to be comfortable. But if he also has some kind of aversion to sex, or perhaps more importantly, just sex with you, that's an important distinction, that's a problem too. Look for a balanced sexual expression between him expressing his own needs, which is fair, but also allowing you to express your needs to him in a reasonably equal balance. With all of this, mutual consent is key. Whatever happens between you sexually and how soon should be a mutual decision of shared consent by both and all parties with legal consent. There are age of consent issues that apply in sexual situations, straight, gay, bi, all of it. And you would need to know what those are for your local community, particularly in situations where you have young people somehow coming into contact with older people. You don't want to be involved in something that might be statutorily a statutory rape situation about age of consent laws wherever you live. So what's the coping for this? Ask for what you want. If you like a guy, even on a first date, you want to do something sexual with him, tell him. You have the right to ask, but he has the right to approve, deny, or modify your proposition. You shouldn't be made to feel bad for asking to do something consensual with him, and you shouldn't be made to feel bad for asking not to do something. If sex is going to happen, it's a creative collaboration between the two or more partners involved. Be brave enough to counter-propose something that you are comfortable with. And if he proposes something that you really do want to do, but you're not sure if you should allow yourself to, I say go for it. If you're both consenting adults, you have a right to do whatever that which is not illegal and or unethical to someone else. And by the way, don't hog time in a public restroom, okay? Let the other patrons have access to it. We get so many negative messages these days about sex and the no routine, but we also have to allow ourselves for the times when yes is actually the right answer for all involved. It's not always about no. I think I'm going to do another episode about that too, because we get so many no messages about slut and sex addiction and this and that and the other, a lot of sex negativity, when we're forgetting that sex has many positive benefits for your mental health, for your physical health, and I think for your social health as a community. So we have to balance the negative messages with the very healthy and positive messages, which are often very individual choices. Number 3, dating and dealing with a guy who's sending you mixed signals. So in one of my blog articles on gaytherapyla.com, and I encourage you to reference some of these because there's some links that are good from article to article, I think, that help fill out the picture. But I talked about approach avoidance, and I think I did a previous episode of the podcast too on approach avoidance. And I started to discuss how guys can be dating in general, or dating you in particular, and kind of be of two minds about it. They're on a date with you, but maybe they would rather not be, even at the last minute. They might be attracted to you physically or emotionally, but be conflicted on whether they really feel they deserve a guy like you, so they hold back. Or they're not used to dating a guy like you because you're older or younger or lighter or darker or different from who they normally date, and they're not sure they want to change that. Or they were into you at first when you were wearing an outfit they liked, but now that you've changed clothes, never mind. Lots of different things can change a guy's motivations for or against dating you, and they can happen suddenly, and maybe even superficially. But oftentimes we don't know what it even was. We just know they went from yes to no or no to yes, and now they're all over you. Mixed signals are crazy making in dating to you, but to the guy feeling them, the motivations might make sense in his world. I think he has an obligation to be honest with you, but many guys aren't. They just end up being chicken shit, avoidance, and then they ghost you. My discussion of gay men and ghosting is also a previous episode. So what's the coping with mixed signals? Reaffirm that he has a right to change his mind about you at any time, and you have the right to change your mind about him. That's why dating can feel like a tenuous process, because you can be voted off the island at almost any point. When I was single, I would dump guys if they stiffed a server or revealed a strong political stance I didn't agree with. I wasn't going to spend my life with a cheap racist, I thought, and I stand by that. I've had guys dump me overnight for reasons I'll never know, and at this point I don't want to know. I just know the answer went from yes to no, and that's all you ever need. I've also had guys who ignored me for months and all of a sudden asked me out and were every bit the fantasy I thought they'd be. People be cray-cray, you know. Good candidates for dating are, in addition to everything else, reasonably consistent and clear in their values, priorities, life goals, ethics, and dating interests. Look for those guys, the guys who seem to have just a consistent stability in what they're looking for and what they want and what they are. Number 4, dating in pitfalls, is somebody who's hung up on their ex. You know, I've had this one and it's not fun. I always say that in dating, guys need to be reasonably geographically, emotionally, physically, and temporally, meaning their sense of time management, available to you. If you're some guy's rebound date after he's just gotten out of a previous relationship, please proceed with caution. Let's say your name was Javi and his ex was Peter. To him, you're not really Javi yet. You're the anti-Peter in his mind. If Peter was a cheat, he'll look for honesty in you. If Peter had a drug or alcohol problem, he'll watch what you drink and use. If Peter couldn't hold down a job, he'll look for job stability in you, and so on. After a breakup, guys need time to emotionally reset to the neutral position. This is especially true with dishonesty. Guys who have been betrayed by previous partners who were dishonest might have a big vulnerability to being jealous or controlling or possessive of you, and kind of on their guard about whether you're going to betray their trust as well, especially when it comes to topics like consensual non-monogamy. And you're not Peter. You have a right to be evaluated based on who you are as Javi, and not who you are in the context of being the opposite of Peter. He owes you that. And if he can't do that, he needs more time to heal before he's really emotionally available to you. And the same thing can happen to a man who's been widowed. You, the real life person, can't be expected to compete with some kind of idealized ghost. So what's the coping with this? If you notice over time that the guy you're dating is not giving you a fair focus because the influence of his relationship prior to you is distracting him, stand up for yourself. Ask your guy if he is truly ready to date again, and decide for yourself if you're willing to wait while he does therapy about the loss. Or help him, through discussion, to make very conscious differentiations between what you know about his ex, at least from his point of view, and who you are. Okay, maybe you ordered a cocktail before dinner and his ex had an alcohol problem. But it was one cocktail before dinner. It wasn't like you showed up for your date drunk. You might need to help your date draw big, thick, Sharpie lines between who you are and who his ex was. There's a new sheriff in town, and his ex is yesterday's news. And if you sense that he doesn't get that, step away until he's had time to figure that out. If he comes back and you're still available, although don't wait around in the meantime, then maybe he would be ready then. But you deserve his full emotional attention, and you deserve to not have to compete with an unseen rival. Number 5, a guy who's hung up on their parents. You know, over so many years in practice working in Los Angeles and in other cities via phone or webcam, in coaching with gay men all over the U.S. and all over the world, I've seen a representation of many different cultures. Social workers like me, clinical social workers, are trained to appreciate the role of culture in people's development and in people's relationships. And in dating, if you're dating a guy from a different culture from yours, he might have some interesting views about his own parents. He might not be out as gay to parents from cultures even more anti-gay than the United States, although that's kind of sad to consider. He might culturally have a fear of angering, alienating, or disappointing them. He might have a strong obligation to provide care for them, such as if they're elderly or disabled or poor. Maybe it's kind of an Anglo-culture bias I have, which I try to own, but I think adulting is a thing. There is a time to grow up, cut the apron strings, differentiate from being a child into an autonomous adult, and frankly grow up. You can love your parents, want to share time with them, holidays, birthdays, Sunday dinner, etc., but still have your own life. I mean, after all, isn't that what they did at some point, really launching from their own parents? If your mother or father wants to control your life, ask how much do they allow their mother or father to control their life now, or through much of their past. My guess is not much. Let the apple fall far from the tree. And this is true for straight men as well. Straight men who are hung up on their mothers and not sufficiently reasonably dedicated to their wives and children are seen as insufficiently developed. When you are someone's partner or spouse, you need to be the top priority. And your partner should, in most cases, not be more loyal to his parents than to you. Especially in gay relationships, where sometimes gay partners can be thrown under the bus in an internalized homophobia way just to keep the peace with the parents. Be a big boy and face the situation as it is. So what's the coping for this? If it's a cultural difference where adult men spend a lot of time with their parents or do as they say, then discuss it. Advocate for the idea that your life together is your life together, not some kind of three-way with your partner and your partner's parents. If you find your partner throwing you under the bus, especially a gay partner, to hide you from the parents' friends and colleagues and other relatives, then call him out on it. You are not to be treated as someone's dirty little secret to save face in the family, or to avoid being cut out of a wealthy parent's will. Make your own money and stand firm that your dignity is not for sale. Cultural differences like this often respond to either couples therapy or relationship coaching, but it's a deliberate process that takes focus. A culturally competent gay affirmative provider can help you forge compromises that take both cultural points of view into consideration and form compromises in this area. And over many years, I've seen this work if both partners are willing, especially about how do you divide time for yourselves versus time for your respective families. Even suspicious or resistant parents do tend to accept their new son-in-law over time, especially with repeated exposure. And usually, with rare exceptions, family bonds win out over initial family or parental ignorance or resistance to gay relationships. Everybody learns and grows in the process. They just need that exposure. The exposure might be rough at first when you come out to your parents, or even if you're already out to them, but they're seeing real evidence of that in terms of you dating somebody. That actually can be the bigger hurdle to climb. That certainly was for me. I was out to my parents when I was single, and it was only after I became partnered that the real rough part came in. But with repeated exposure through family events and visits and things like that, and setting some boundaries too, eventually it became a lot smoother. And even with my very, very homophobic dad, he came to like, and I think even love, my husband. I don't know that he ever saw him as a true son-in-law exactly, but he certainly saw him, I think, as a member of the family. So repeated exposure is your best friend in something like that. And if you like his mother's cooking, I think that helps a lot too. So, number 6, overcoming trauma or PTSD in dating. So, guys who are trauma survivors date too. The number of gay men out there dating who either have actual post-traumatic stress disorder or something very close to it is large. You have to mentally and emotionally allow for the possibility that a guy that you meet and start dating and become increasingly involved with has some trauma symptoms that cause either mild inconvenience or outright major disruption to your life. And it could be either one of you. Guys can be violent crime survivors, accident survivors, sexual abuse or incest survivors, combat veterans, AIDS crisis survivors, orphans, refugees, or any number of situations that might, although not in all cases, result in PTSD symptoms. A guy like this might have nightmares when you sleep with him, or even more severe night terrors. He might have odd aversions to certain things that are triggering. Now, that can also be true in something like autism spectrum disorder, but that's kind of a discussion for another time. He might have an extra sensitive startle response, or he might have odd times or stimuli that trigger his anxiety. And he's likely to keep all these secret until he really gets to know you well enough to disclose why he says or does certain things, having probably learned to be self-reliant after suffering a traumatic loss or betrayal. He might seem a bit guarded or emotionally withholding, like he's not that into you, when actually he likes you a lot, but is taking everything in life slowly and cautiously because he's learned to navigate the world that way out of a sense of self-protection in the aftermath of trauma. So how do we cope with this? If you see him reacting to something that just feels odd to you, try to reassure him with what you know. Like, hey, I saw a documentary once on trauma survivors who had bad dreams a lot. Have you been through something rough? Tell me whatever you feel comfortable saying about it, and I'll try to understand with your help. So, while you should try hard to be patient, compassionate, and understanding, there are limits. If he's waking you up every night by nightmares and screaming, okay, you can be comforting, but you also might start to insist that he go to therapy to reduce trauma symptoms, since you have to be up at 5 a.m. for work and you need sleep. And sometimes one partner learning to overcome and heal trauma is a shared experience for both partners, particularly the more it affects your everyday life, or things like your sex life. You can have a reasonable expectation that he's doing all he can to heal, not unlike someone with a drug or alcohol problem. And that's number 7. Drug and alcohol issues. Substance issues, unfortunately, are some of the most common and the most toxic problems in gay male relationships that I work with. Alcohol is the classic one and the most common, but others such as crystal meth are prominent too. Chemsex, party and play, that kind of thing. And I'm fairly progressive on all things sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Even relative to other therapists and other providers, I take a more liberal stance. And I believe in and work with a lot of guys from the harm reduction model perspective. But I also know when to counsel someone on coming to terms with a substance misuse problem. In a very early blog article on gaytherapy.com, I have an article called The Relationship with the Bottle. And I have another one called Getting Clean from Green, which is about marijuana overuse. And I have another one called Getting Crystal Clear, which is about specifically crystal meth abuse. So you may want to just browse gaytherapyla.com/blog, and if you use the keywords relationship with the bottle, Getting Clean from Green, or Crystal Clear, those articles will come up. And I realize that 12-step programs can be flawed. The complaint I hear the most is about the religiosity, and a lot of gay men have been abused by religious institutions that are anti-gay, so they might be atheist or agnostic, and 12-step can be a little hypocritical because they say it's a God of your choice, and then they do the Lord's Prayer, which is a Judeo-Christian prayer. So, it's not perfect, but yet, actually, honestly, 12 steps has been some of the most consistently helpful that I've observed, particularly in getting somebody initially very stabilized. And especially if the person involved customizes the program to their needs, which the program would say, take what you want and leave the rest. But I also work with guys on 12-step alternatives, such as SMART Recovery, SMART, that's an acronym. Guys who absolutely reject 12-step for whatever reason, it's catty, it's religious, it's whatever. Smart Recovery and their related workbook can be a very healthy alternative, as is outpatient therapy. I've worked with guys who've overcome bad alcohol or crystal meth problems just by individual therapy alone, and that is kind of a thing. But it takes a lot of dedication. Whatever that person does to overcome a fairly significant substance challenge, it's got to be done with enthusiasm. It's got to be consistent therapy attendance. It's got to be consistent 12-step meeting attendance. It's got to be delving deep in smart recovery programs. It's got to be something, because it won't work if you go at it half-assed. It's just 30 years of observation have led me to strong conclusions about that. So working with individuals on this in therapy or coaching is key, but I also think couples who are experiencing this need their own focus on how a substance issue in one or both partners affect a relationship. The role of the partner who does not necessarily have the substance misuse challenge is key. Al-Anon can be a good resource, but I think couples work helps in a different way. But if you're dating somebody with this kind of problem, it's not likely to get much better on its own soon. Something needs to be done that's fairly strong and active. Just like any other challenge that a guy you're dating might have, anything that makes him less emotionally available to you is going to be a barrier to cultivating any serious relationship. So, how do we cope with this? Be observant of how your partner relates to alcohol and other substances. See if you can point to actual harm from it. If the guy is canceling plans with you because he's too involved with the substance, that's a red flag. So is being so intoxicated around you or your friends that you feel alone or even embarrassed when you're with him. Try to discern a difference between a fun night out with relatively little harm and a more serious situation, like risking a DUI charge or an arrest or failing to meet work responsibilities. Except that while a guy could be great to date in many ways, unless and until he somehow deals with drinking or using too much, a relationship with him is not going to progress through the expected growth stages in dating. Wait until he's really emotionally available to you. Number 8, our last one, is about attachment issues, particularly avoidant. So much has been discussed lately about attachment theory and how it affects people's relationship styles. And I think this theory can be useful, but I think it can be overused. It's being a bit trendy. I use it some, I just don't use it a ton. There are therapists who are specialists in attachment theory and just kind of hitch their wagon to that, but I take a broader kind of multi-theoretical approach because you never know what's going to help that particular person or that particular couple. But guys who have the avoidant attachment style tend to consistently keep relationships or attachment at arm's length, out of a sense of self-protection and not getting too close for fear of some kind of hurt. Some therapists really focus on attachment styles of each partner in a relationship, but I think they have to be put in a certain concrete behavioral context. Guys tend to fall on a spectrum of relationship styles that run between enmeshment, meaning very close most of the time, like a fusion, and kind of not in a very good way, versus the opposite is estrangement, where they want a relationship, but they also want a lot of elbow room and put a high value on autonomy. Over time, you can probably discern where on the spectrum your dating situation is. On the spectrum between being very enmeshed and very estranged, you have to decide if you can accept his style compared to yours. Couples work can help you meet in the middle and find a spot on the enmeshment and estrangement continuum to kind of set up camp, and that's where your relationship style is going to be, and that might be different from other gay male couples that you know. But at a certain point in dating, you have to realize that if you're too far apart on this, you might not have the basic compatibility that's needed to form a sound relationship. Relationships can be evaluated either by their length or by their quality. So I think enduring relationships that are reported to be of high quality tend to have a lot of factors about compatibility, emotionally, culturally, sexually, enmeshment versus estrangement. There's just kind of an ease that you fit together and kind of complement each other. But part of the dating process over time is doing an assessment about how these different compatibility factors gel between the two of you or more of you. So good relationships tend to get a high score on compatibility, and dating experiences that fizzle tend to be lower on that. It's just not jibing sometimes for one or more reasons. So what's the coping with different attachment styles? Ask yourself at perhaps regular intervals in dating if you just plain feel compatible with this guy's attachment style, communication style, ways of spending your free time together versus time apart, and his relationship to you versus relationships to other people in his life. The best dating situations just feel easy and comfortable in this way. You shouldn't really feel like you have to force it. Even though I think there's a place for doing couples work in early dating. I have an earlier episode on that. It's not necessarily a bad sign if you guys do relationship coaching or couples therapy early in the relationship, because I think actually it can clarify if you're compatible, and it can help you to build a strong foundation that you just build and build on. I do that a lot, and I see it work because I'm able to kind of share in an amalgamated way different kind of tips about what I've seen over the years that tends to make a gay male couple relationship work versus the things that are the most likely to be trouble, which is a lot of these things I've listed today. Perhaps a certain ease in dating is another way of putting it. It's one of the simplest but best signs. Conversely, feeling a sense of being uncomfortable in your gut after a date is a sign that on some level you're reacting to red flags in the dating situation, and listen to those. Sometimes bad relationship situations continue because someone wasn't listening to that discomfort and didn't duck out early. Second chances, such as second dates, can really be a good idea, especially since guys on a first date might not be at their best. If they're nervous or socially anxious or trying hard to impress you and it backfires. But third and fourth chances establish a pattern. Good self-esteem means that no matter how long it takes, and I work with plenty of guys for whom it takes or took a long time to find someone truly compatible, it's worth waiting until it feels just right. Don't let impatience just to be with someone overrule being comfortable. Wait for the guy that makes dating feel easy, even if you know that ultimately relationships take work, and you deserve nothing less. So, if you would like more specific help with your dating approach or a longer relationship or any quality of life challenge, please consider therapy for California residents where I'm licensed, or coaching everywhere else. You can call or text me in the U.S. at 310-339-5778. They always say repeat numbers, right? Call or text 310-339-5778. Or you can email me, Ken, at gaytherapyla.com for more information on the services that I offer. So, thanks, and I'll see you next time.